Hi everyone! So I've been talking about the new Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette since it was first teased. Of course, Natasha Denona would release something that inspires me and intrigues me and just interests me. It's no surprise. I was just talking about how I was very influenced by the 60s and sort of more pastel kind of makeup and cooler tones. And what does Natasha Denona do but create mini retro? So mini retro is one of the little mini palettes. Natasha Denona has done quite a few, usually in conjunction with some sort of collection or with a larger palette. This has me hopeful that there's going to be a larger retro inspired palette, but also I don't want it because then, well, I don't want it to exist because then I would want it and cannot have it. So I don't have the mini retro palette. Just for reference, I will show some pictures of what the palette looks like. I will show some swatches. I actually have a mini gold palette. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, and may be a little thrown off by some of the images that you see, it's actually a tiny palette. It's this big, but I like the smaller pan sizes personally. I am very inspired by Natasha Denona stuff. You can kind of see the usage on this palette alone. This retails for $33 currently Canadian, and I believe about $25 US. Prices will obviously vary depending on where you are located. I believe it was just released the end of March, and I don't think it's been released everywhere yet, the mini retro palette. So I ended up duping the palette somewhat. Now obviously a dupe without having the actual thing in front of you is going to be a little bit different. I've seen a few people on YouTube and on Instagram do sort of like duping the vibes. I'm just going to stick with the same name that I've seen everybody else use. Just where you're kind of capturing the spirit of the palette, the general color scheme without being exact, although I do have one exact shadow because Vintage Taupe is actually a shade from the Tropic palette, which I have. So one shadow is identical. It's really hard to get close, in my opinion, when you can only see sort of altered swatches. When you have general shade descriptions, I tried looking up swatches for people who actually have this palette and more real swatches, because some of the website swatches in most cases for most things are often just a little misleading, and you know, they don't look very true to swatch or to pan necessarily. So I did do a comparison side-by-side swatch. So I found these swatches from someone on Instagram, and then I put the things that I had swatched side by side just to give you sort of an initial comparison of the actual mini retro swatches and my swatches. And you can even see how different Vintage Taupe looks in different lighting, and that was one thing that I noticed while looking at different swatches. But I feel like I captured sort of the general spirit of the palette, and I also was looking at these swatches. These are the ones that are pretty heavily altered in my opinion. They look almost too perfect, and I don't think the actual swatches, the actual palette is that pigmented, perhaps, with actual usage. A lot of swatches tend to be very heavy because they're just showing you the general color, not actually how it will apply or how you would actually use it. I am wearing shadows from my little mini inspired palette. I roughly followed a Natasha Denona Instagram tutorial. I just played around with stuff and then I ended up adding lashes because that's how I do. So I believe she keeps those up on her stories on Instagram for a while, so you can always go check that out. I'll kind of put an image here. I know it's not exact. Well, the makeup itself is a little bit different because I did my own sort of variation. I went probably a little bit more dramatic and added the lashes, but I think you can kind of see the same sort of general thing going. So anyway, with all of that stuff said, let's go into the shadows that I ended up picking and how this ended up coming to be. Because I've had a few people ask if I was going to get this palette. A few people were like, okay, this is right up your alley, you're getting this. And I was like, no, actually I'm not, but I want it. And I was a little down about it for a while, and I kept trying to think, how can I justify it? I wanted it. And I ended up sitting on the floor swatching shadows because I've had a few more people ask to see more of my single things. They wanted to see some of my favorite single shadows, and I hadn't really considered this before, so I was sitting down and I was swatching things and kind of putting things into little piles. And I noticed I started putting these like green shadows and pink shadows and just like cooler tones, cooler sort of taupes and grays all together, and I was like, this looks very familiar. I was so inspired by the Mini Retro palette that I couldn't actually see beyond that to see the sort of more everyday things I would wear. The most common things you see with my singles are various shades of greens, a lot of metallic shades, a lot of golds, a lot of the same sort of tones in that regard. There's also a lot of like burgundies and like foiled sort of oranges, and just a lot of those sort of more warmer tones in general that I tend to really gravitate towards and that I tend to really like. But I do have, you know, a handful of things that are a slight variation of that, and that's what I ended up gravitating towards. So as I started moving these things together and organizing things, I started to think of more things that I owned and what I could kind of pair together to get a general vibe of the Mini Retro. So it was difficult at first to come up with the top two shadows. So these top two are Inglot, then there's Natasha Denona. The green is from Luxie Beauty, and then a old Makeup Geek shadow. So it was a variation of different things, and I wish it was all like square pans, because it would be great to have like the actual square pans like the Natasha ones, or if just that they were all circles. I don't like that they are different pan sizes, but that's just a little thing. I could probably reorganize this a little bit better, but I just kind of wanted to keep the general order of the shadows. I just had this empty little Z palette, so I thought that I would use that for now and just kind of play around with it. So I really had a difficult time with the top two because Natasha Denona metallic shades are very unique. There's a lot of little subtle things going on sort of underneath the layers. There's little sparks of different colors and little flashes, and it's not just like a straight up, you know, like pink or metallic, or, you know, in this case it's not a straight up silver in the Natasha Denona. I will also say that 3 of the shades are not new. The vintage taupe one is from the shopping palette, and I believe the top 2 metallic from the Mini Retro are from the Star palette, which I don't have. That's one of the big like 300 Canadian dollar palettes. I don't have that. And then the other 2 are new shades, just specifically for that palette as of right now. So, okay, the first shadow that I picked is a shadow from Inglot, and it is 154. So I think this is probably the one that is least like the actual shadow in the palette. In the description, it is described as a nude with green and blue sparks. Now, I don't like when shadows are described as being nude because they generally aren't nude for everyone. But from the swatch, you can't really see the blue and green sparks, and that's the thing I was talking about with Natasha Denona shadows. But it has a really nice metallic sheen, a really nice sort of reflective shimmer to it, at least just from the picture swatch. So I wanted something that would sort of capture that a little bit, and where this is such a lighter color, a lighter metallic shade, but it still has that beautiful reflect. I thought that it would kind of pair really well with the rest of the shades in here and would be a little bit like Galaxia. Industrial is the other shadow that I duped with an Inglot shade. My Inglot shade is 152, and it is a beautiful silver. Industrial from the Mini Retro palette, though, is described as being a green taupe with silver reflect. Now, on the swatches, it really does just look like a straight up silver. It's hard to see much variation from that. Now, in some of the real swatches, you can see a little bit more of that green, and that excites me a little bit because I don't have anything like that. And I know the shadow exists in a palette, and I'm pretty sure you could buy this as a single as well, but the single is like 20 US. I think Natasha Denona single shadows are ridiculously expensive, and in some cases it's just not worth buying, like especially if something like a mini palette exists for not much more than that cost. So it looks like a straight up silver, so like that's what's on my lid right now. I followed the Natasha Denona Instagram tutorial like I mentioned, and I used the green, like the two matte shades. So I used the vintage taupe and the green shade, and then I used the silver, and I think it looks fairly similar, at least from a distance. And if you look at the Natasha Denona finished sort of look and you look at mine, at first glance it looks kind of similar, but I feel like if you actually looked more into it, you would see more of the green in her look than you see in mine, despite having used the green shadow. But we'll get to the green in a minute. So I think it's close-ish. It definitely gives the sort of same sort of spirit, and I feel like it still is a little bit 60s. So the next shade in Mini Retro is actually just called 60s. It is a matte grayish green. Now my dupe is called Moss, and it's from Luxie Beauty, and it is a matte green. I wouldn't say it's necessarily very gray. I have other things that look more similar in the pan, but just didn't swatch as well. Like if they looked a little more gray green in the pan, they swatched a lot more gray, or even a little bit more blue than green. This is the thing that seemed to be closest just based on swatch, not necessarily what it looks like in the pan. And from some of the swatches, I do think it's pretty close from what I have. It could be a little bit more gray, like a light little swatch of gray, like on top of that would probably make it almost identical, but I didn't go that far, and I'm not sort of frankening any of these things. I'm not trying to like create an exact dupe from something that I don't actually have to see. But I think that the 60s sort of grayish green is a really beautiful color. I love all the greens Natasha has been doing recently with some of her palettes, including like the Mini Gold palette and the Metropolis palette. So I think that's a really fun addition to that palette, and I really like how it sort of pairs with the sort of silver with a little bit of green in it. And I think it's a really fun, whimsical color scheme, and also it is very 60s, and it's sort of unique to what you see now. So that's also what's been fun, because I never really would have thought of pairing these exact shadows together. So my Moss shadow from Luxie Beauty is no longer available. I will mention that. I did look it up. The two Inglot ones are available. The green shade is not. The other shadow isn't exactly a Natasha Denona shadow. This is Vintage Taupe. This is the same shadow that's in the palette already. It is a matte antique rose, so it is described. It's a really beautiful matte. The Tropic palette matte shadows is what sold me initially on the Natasha Denona formula, because I really loved how soft and blendable those shadows were. So incredibly easy to use. I had just the most wonderful time using those shadows in the palette. They work really well as blushes as well, and they are just delightful to have on the eye. So I feel like this is a really great combination, and despite the differences between the sort of antique rose and the various shades of green, it really works very well at blending shadows out. I watched Natasha do it, and I was like, I'm gonna try it and see, and it really is seamless. Like, you don't see the shadow at all. It just really blends things together. It's like she knows what she's doing when she's putting together color stories. Also, I really love that there's 3 metallic shades and 2 mattes. Like, I feel like she gets the balance really well as well. But obviously I don't need the palette to get this one, because it's the same shadow. At least I believe it's the same shadow. I'm not sure if the formula is different, because I haven't actually touched that one, but I'm thinking it's probably gonna be the same. The last shadow in the Mini Retro palette is a pink with a champagne shift. That would be the other new shadow called Pixie. So I also think the names are really cute. I like that she named the 2 new shades 60s and Pixie. My shadow choice is an older one from Makeup Geek. It is called In the Spotlight. It's one of the foiled eyeshadows. This does still exist. I'm not sure what it's like reformulated, because it's now in the square pans, and I believe there were some formula changes as well, so I'm not sure what it performs like. I was drawn to that one for my dupe in this palette, because it has a shimmer, it doesn't really have a champagne shift. It's just very foiled and very metallic. So I feel like it could be a little bit more on the pink side instead of the peach side, and it would be closer. The initial swatches and even in the pan, I thought of Come and Get It from ColourPop, but that was too pink, too rich of a color. This is much lighter, and I like that because I feel like it would really go well with the silvery green shade as well. I'm getting a lot of ideas for things to play around with my sort of mini retro creation, but this is a very inspiring color scheme because I feel like we haven't seen anything like this right now, and I think it would be very interesting to see what she does if she decides to do a larger palette, like inspired by some sort of like 60s retro color scheme. I think it would be very interesting because we just don't have stuff like that now, in my opinion. That's at least like mainstream and accessible, because it is cooler, it is a little bit more unusual. It reminds me, it's not similar at all, but it reminds me of Subculture in that way from Anastasia, where it was just this unusual color scheme, and that's what I feel like this is. It's unusual, and I want to see more of that because we see so many of the same warm shades over and over again. Love them, but I just like to see something new and something inspiring. So I just wanted to share this with you guys because I really didn't think I was going to be able to like dupe this at all. I counted it out entirely. I responded to a few people who were like, please dupe it and show, you know, dupe the vibes. And I was like, I can't, I don't have anything like it. Little did I know, I actually had something fairly similar. So I still want the mini retro palette, I will say, despite having this fairly close dupe. I still want it because I know the shadows have those little differences. I know how much I like the formula. I know how much I would use it despite not having a lot of usage on these particular shadows. That doesn't say everything. I think I would still get quite a bit of usage on the metallic shades in the palette for sure. But not in my budget right now, so I will not be buying the mini retro. So to answer that question, because I know I will get it, I am not planning on purchasing it. I will be using my makeshift mini retro and playing around with that, and I'm excited to see what kind of things I can come up with, and also look and see what sort of tutorials and inspiration also happens to surface on Natasha Denona's Instagram, because that's where I get a lot of my inspiration from these days, and I have for the last little while. So very excited for the inspiration aspect. Now I know a few of these things cannot be purchased. The point of this video isn't to try and sell you on any dupes. Honestly, I think with a palette that's this small and this relatively affordable, it's not worth it to go the dupe route because it's going to be more expensive. Like the Ingloss shadows, I believe, are about $12 Canadian. So just to buy two of those is $24. You know, the full palette's $33. To try and dupe everything for a palette that's this small, if you had to buy all of the shadows because you had none of them, it really wouldn't be worth it. In my opinion, I feel like you would end up spending more money than just buying the palette itself. But shop your stash. Look at the stuff that you already have. Look and put together things, because I definitely didn't think I could do this until I started swatching things. And don't forget palettes. Don't neglect them. Don't feel like you have to only dupe something from your singles. Look at your palettes. You might have a shadow hiding in one of those palettes that looks very similar to this. And also, but I will say, if you don't have any of these shades in your collection, maybe stop for a second and think why. If you don't like silvers, if you don't like greens, if you don't like shimmery sort of champagne pink colors, you probably don't like wearing them, or you don't like the way that they look on you, so you're not gonna like that general color scheme. So it doesn't make sense to kind of buy those shadows in any format, you know, buying the actual palette or buying, you know, singles if you don't like them. If you already know that, you may not know, you may think maybe I actually would like silver, or maybe I would like green or pink, whatever the color combinations may be. But just also think about that as well, because it's pretty easy to see something new and shiny and want it, but then actually not like it. You know, I have panned silver shadows before. I've panned pink shimmery shadows before, so I know the things that I like, and I like a wide variety of things, but I know that these kind of tones I've used before in the past with various Urban Decay and Anastasia and MAC shadows. I know I would get quite a bit of usage out of these sort of colors as well, and it's no coincidence that I have these similar shades in my collection. So just something to consider as well. And if you are thinking about purchasing something new, whether it's a mini palette or a large palette, put together a handful of the similar shades and see if you actually end up using it, or if you just look at the colors because they're pretty. I ended up doing that with my dupe for the Melt Morte palette. I put together a dupe the vibes of it, and because I really wanted the palette, and that talked me out of it, because I was like, you know what, as beautiful as these colors are, I have similar things that I don't use because I don't like them. Like, I just don't like the way it looks on me that much. So it was very easy to talk myself out of it in that case. So just something to keep in mind if you were thinking about trying to dupe anything at all. That's why I sort of hesitated doing these videos before, because I felt like a lot of people wanted me to show just straight up singles that they could purchase themselves, and I feel like that sort of defeats the purpose a lot of the times for the things that I talk about, because it's not about buying a whole bunch of new things, it's about looking at what you already have and rediscovering those things and making those things work for you, and then bringing in things that would help with the stuff that you already have and stuff that you already like. And I don't know, I don't like the idea of just like straight up buy these singles because you're gonna love them. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. I hope you understand a little bit more of my motivation behind doing a video like this. I'd love to do more videos like this if you guys like this sort of concept. Maybe I'd even draw in from some palettes that I have, whether or not they are permanent or discontinued. Again, you know, not the point, just kind of about shopping my stash and seeing what I can come up with. And if you want to see any sort of looks with my mini retro inspired palette, let me know. I was thinking about maybe trying to film myself actually recreating a Natasha Denona Instagram tutorial, like actually, not just doing what I want to do halfway through, but maybe actually doing it, which could be fun and probably pretty challenging. So anyway, let me know if there's any videos at all you would like to see, whether it's about this or another sort of palette or just any sort of general video ideas. I would love to hear from you. It's a little difficult for me right now coming up with sort of fresh video concepts, because I want to create stuff that people want to see, and I want to, you know, be able to provide a little bit of entertainment if it's at all possible to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are having a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I hope we get a chance to chat soon. Bye for now.